The sky hung heavy with rain, the kind that blurred the edges of the city into a watercolor mess. Isabella Turner sprinted across the crosswalk, clutching a soaked resume folder against her chest, her heart pounding in her ears louder than the storm above. She was late, not just fashionably but disgracefully late, and this was supposed to be her shot. Her breath caught as she spotted the gleaming building ahead, mistaking its opulent sign for the small art studio she'd been praying to find. Fate, it seemed, had a darker sense of humor than she ever imagined. Inside, the marble floors glistened, and the lobby buzzed with the energy of people too important to smile. Isabella hesitated just long enough to wonder if she was, perhaps, in the wrong place, but desperation shoved her forward. A receptionist with a tight bun and tighter expression barely glanced up. "Name?" Isabella squeaked it out, cheeks burning. Without a word, the receptionist handed her a badge and motioned toward the elevators. Somehow, Izzy's feet moved on their own, like they knew better than her that running away wasn't an option anymore. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Izzy caught a glimpse of her reflection, drenched hair, muddy shoes, and a blouse that clung awkwardly to her frame. Not exactly the polished image she'd imagined. A group of sleek, suited professionals eyed her warily, shifting subtly away. She pretended not to notice, focusing instead on memorizing the badge number, 27B. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't prepared for this. She didn't even know what this was, but she'd made it this far. She could fake the rest. The doors slid open on the 27th floor, revealing a hallway so pristine it looked untouched by human hands. An assistant awaited her, clipboard in hand. "Isabella Turner?" she asked briskly. Izzy nodded, too breathless to correct her. "Follow me." They wove through glass offices and minimalist decor until they stopped at a heavy wooden door. "Wait here. Mr. Harrison will see you shortly." Before she could ask who Mr. Harrison was, the assistant vanished, leaving her alone in the sterile hallway. Minutes dragged into eternity. Izzy shifted from foot to foot, aware that every movement echoed off the polished floors. When the door finally opened, it revealed a man who seemed carved from stone. Sharp jawline, stormy eyes, and a presence so commanding it made her forget how to breathe. Alexander Harrison, CEO, legend, cautionary tale. He barely spared her a glance as he gestured for her to enter. The air in the office was colder, charged with something she couldn't name, something dangerous. Alex sat behind a desk large enough to launch a small country. He tapped his fingers against the surface, eyeing her resume with faint amusement. "Isabella Turner," he said slowly, as if tasting the syllables. "Applying for the executive liaison position." Izzy's heart stumbled. "Executive? What now?" She swallowed hard. "Yes," she lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm very enthusiastic." His eyebrow arched the slightest bit, a silent challenge. And somehow, against every instinct for self-preservation, Izzy smiled. The interview felt like a psychological experiment. Alex threw sharp questions like darts, testing, probing, and Izzy answered with a strange mix of sincerity and humor. She didn't know she had. When he asked about crisis management, she spoke about juggling 3 part-time jobs and an incontinent dog. When he demanded examples of leadership under pressure, she recounted calming a wedding party after the bride fainted mid-ceremony. It was absurd, and yet he listened. Something in Alex's steely facade cracked, so subtly that anyone else might have missed it. A flicker of curiosity, quickly masked by professional indifference. He set the resume down and leaned back, studying her. "You're persistent and clearly out of your depth." Izzy opened her mouth to apologize, but he held up a hand. "That's not a criticism, it's rare." The room hummed with something electric. A moment stretched long enough for Izzy to wonder if she'd just hallucinated a compliment. "You'll start tomorrow," Alex said abruptly, rising from his chair. Izzy blinked, sure she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" He smirked, and for a fleeting second he looked almost human. 8 a.m. sharp, don't be late again." Before she could protest or confess that she had no idea what she'd been hired for, he was already walking toward the door. "Oh, and Isabella," he added without turning, "welcome to Harrison Dynamics." The door clicked shut behind him. Izzy stood there, heart hammering, reality crashing down. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to have made it past the lobby. And yet, here she was. Somehow impossibly hired by one of the most ruthless men in the business world. The elevator ride down felt surreal, her reflection in the mirrored walls grinning back at her like a stranger. Maybe she was a little crazy. Maybe that's exactly what got her the job. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the city lights. Izzy clutched her badge tighter, a strange thrill bubbling in her chest. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't even remotely deserved it. But fate didn't care about plans. Sometimes it only needed a mistake, one misstep, and suddenly everything changed. As she walked away from the building, she didn't notice the dark figure watching from the window above, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. Alex Harrison had just done something he never did. He'd taken a risk, and risks, they had a way of rewriting stories. The next morning dawned in muted grey, the kind of colourless sky that made every decision feel heavier. Isabella stood in front of Harrison Dynamics once more, her badge swinging nervously from her lanyard. She double-checked her outfit, less waterlogged today, but still unmistakably off-brand from the tailored perfection surrounding her. Taking a breath deep enough to lift her on her toes, she walked through the revolving doors and stepped into the unknown. The receptionist didn't even flinch this time, merely pointed her toward the elevators with a look that said, "Don't embarrass us." Izzy nodded stiffly and marched toward the chrome doors, her reflection bouncing awkwardly back at her. Today wasn't about luck. Today had to be about pretending she belonged, until maybe, somehow, it became true. She pressed 27, the floor that had changed her life overnight, and watched the numbers climb, her pulse sinking with the ascent. The elevator dinged, and Izzy stepped into the 27th floor's silent efficiency. Everything felt sharper today, the clicking of keyboards, the muted murmur of power meetings behind glass walls. Before she could wander into another wrong office, the assistant from yesterday intercepted her. "Mr. Harrison asked to see you, now." The urgency in her voice turned Izzy's nerves into full-blown nausea, but she followed without protest, weaving through pristine hallways until she stood once again before the heavy oak door. Inside, Alex Harrison sat behind his desk, reviewing something on his tablet with a frown that could send grown men running. He didn't look up when she entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Izzy sat, careful to tuck her knees neatly together like she belonged there. After a few agonizing seconds, Alex set the tablet down and finally met her eyes. His gaze wasn't sharp today. It was calculating. "Miss Turner," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "I'm offering you something outside the bounds of any typical employment agreement." Izzy blinked, caught between terror and intrigue. "You're offering what exactly?" she asked cautiously. Alex leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I need a fiancé." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Izzy blinked. Again, sure she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you say fiancé?" A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes stayed deadly serious. "You see, my grandfather, the founder of this company, placed a clause in our succession agreement. To inherit full control, I must appear settled," his words, not mine. "A committed, stable image. Otherwise, control fragments to the board." Izzy opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to process. "And you think me pretending to be your fiancé will fix that?" Alex shrugged lightly, as if discussing a change in catering options. You made an impression yesterday. Unpredictable, unpolished, real. No one would believe I staged it. Izzy stared at him. Is this legal? Technically, he replied smoothly. Is it ethical? Her voice cracked slightly. Alex's lips twitched again. You're remarkably concerned for someone who lied her way into a job yesterday. Heat flushed her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. What's in it for me? She asked after a long silence, voice barely above a whisper. Alex tilted, his head thoughtfully. A substantial bonus, financial security, and at the end of the arrangement references powerful enough to open any door you want. The offer dangled between them, bright and dangerous like a blade. And what exactly would I have to do? Izzy asked carefully. Alex's answer was chilling. In its simplicity, convince everyone you're the love of my life. A laugh, high and disbelieving, slipped out before she could stop it. You're serious. Deadly. He pushed a thick envelope across the desk. Inside, she glimpsed what looked like a preliminary contract. You'll have full protections, a time limit 6 months. Afterward, we part ways cleanly. Izzy swallowed. 6 months pretending to love a man who terrified her on instinct alone. 6 months immersed in a world she barely understood. Why me? She asked, genuinely puzzled. Alex's gaze sharpened. Because you're not like them, he said quietly. You're chaos. You're uncalculated. They'll believe it because it's the last thing they'd expect from me. For a moment, Izzy forgot to breathe. He wasn't paying her a compliment. He was issuing a challenge. And somehow, deep in the parts of her that craved survival and change, and something bigger than herself, Izzy wanted to accept. Still, she hesitated. If I say no, she asked. Alex smiled coldly. Then you're free to walk out, no harm, no foul. But the next girl won't get half the deal you're being offered. The subtext was clear. You'll regret it. Izzy looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly. She remembered the stack of unpaid bills at home, the dream slipping further away every day. She remembered the way the rain soaked through her jacket yesterday, leaving her cold and alone. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and picked up the envelope. Her fingers brushed his across the polished wood, sending an unexpected jolt through her. Their eyes locked, two stubborn forces colliding in a moment neither would dare name yet. 6 months, she confirmed. 6 months, he echoed. No real feelings, no complications. Izzy forced a laugh. You're asking the impossible. Alex's expression was unreadable. Maybe, he said, or maybe you just don't know what you're capable of yet. Without another word, Izzy rose, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. As she reached the door, Alex called after her, voice quiet but cutting. And Isabella, she turned, wear something convincing tomorrow. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked down the pristine hallway, the walls closing in around her. She had just agreed to live a lie so big it could devour her whole. And somehow, impossibly, she wasn't afraid. She was excited. The next morning, Isabella woke before dawn. The city still wrapped in shadows. She sat at the edge of her tiny bed, staring at the envelope from Harrison Dynamics. Its weight felt disproportionate, as if it carried not just paper, but a future she hadn't dared to dream of. The choice was simple in theory, impossibly complicated in reality. 6 months of pretending. 6 months of lies wrapped in silk and steel. She dressed carefully, opting for something simple but sharp, a navy blue dress that made her feel taller, braver. As she stared at herself in the mirror, she whispered, "You can do this," and tried to believe it. The morning air bit at her skin as she walked to the subway, the city already rumbling awake beneath her feet. With each passing station, the knot in her stomach tightened. She wasn't just going to a job, she was going to rewrite her life. At Harrison Dynamics, the atmosphere buzzed with a quiet urgency. The receptionist barely looked up this time as Izzy signed in. She rode the elevator alone, watching her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked different today, more deliberate, less lost. When the doors opened, Alex's assistant was already waiting. "This way," she said briskly. No questions, no smiles, just business. Izzy followed her into a conference room that looked more like a boardroom for kings. Alex was there, of course, standing by the massive window that overlooked the restless city. His suit was charcoal grey today, and the light caught the sharp planes of his face, making him look almost unapproachable. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sit," he said simply. She obeyed, feeling like she was stepping into a chess match she didn't know the rules of. On the table between them sat 2 thick documents and a small black box. "You read the initial terms?" he asked without looking at her. Izzy cleared her throat. "Enough to know I'm probably out of my mind for being here." That earned the ghost of a smirk. Finally Alex turned, his hands slipping into his pockets. "This," he said, tapping the larger document, "is the formal agreement. It covers compensation, non-disclosure, performance expectations." He tapped the other. "And this is the exit strategy. If either of us wants out early." Izzy stared at the stack of legalese. It might as well have been written in code. "Performance expectations?" she asked cautiously. Alex's lips quirked again, but his eyes stayed serious. "Public appearances, photographs, occasional interviews. You'll have to stay in character at all times in public and around my family." The words, "stay in character," twisted in her chest. This wasn't just a role. It was a full immersion, no half measures. "And if I mess up?" she asked, heart thudding. "There's a penalty clause," he said flatly. "Severe enough that you'll want to avoid it." Izzy swallowed hard, nodding. "What about personal boundaries?" she blurted, the words escaping before she could filter them. Alex's expression didn't change. "Nothing happens without your consent. No exceptions." The relief that flooded her was immediate, though she tried not to show it. He picked up the small black box and slid it across the table. It stopped just in front of her. Izzy frowned and opened it cautiously, revealing a delicate engagement ring. Not too flashy, but undeniably expensive. The kind of ring that would look good in photographs. The kind of ring that said, "I love her to the world, even if the truth was much colder." "You'll need to wear it," Alex said, watching her reaction. Izzy slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Nothing about Alex Harrison would be left to chance. She flexed her hand, the stone catching the light, dazzling and foreign. She almost laughed at the absurdity. Yesterday she was a nobody scrambling for survival. Today she wore a ring worth more than her annual rent. Life didn't just throw curveballs. Sometimes it dropped entire planets on your head. Alex slid a pen across the table next. "Sign," he said simply. His voice wasn't commanding this time. It was almost quiet, as if he understood the gravity of what he was asking her to do. Izzy hesitated for one heartbeat, then another. She thought of the late nights waitressing, the humiliating temp jobs, the gnawing hunger for something, anything, better. And slowly, with a hand that barely shook, she signed her name. The moment the pen left the paper, Alex spoke again. "From this moment on, Isabella Turner doesn't exist." She looked up sharply. "Excuse me." "From this moment," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "you're Izzy Harrison, future wife of Alexander Harrison. Behave accordingly." Izzy's mouth went dry. It was one thing to agree to a lie. It was another to live inside it. He offered her his hand. For one dizzying second she hesitated. Then she slipped her fingers into his. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. A flicker of something passed. Between them, fear, excitement, maybe madness. "Welcome to the next 6 months of your life," Alex said, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. Izzy smiled back, though her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. As they left the conference room together, every head in the office turned. Izzy felt their gazes trail over her, curious, skeptical, calculating. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, squeezing Alex's hand just a little tighter. If she was going to survive this, she would have to become someone new, someone who could lie convincingly with her whole heart, someone who could fool the world, and maybe, just maybe, herself. The world outside Harrison Dynamics looked different that night, blurred by raindrops on tinted glass. In the back seat of the black car, Isabella fidgeted with the engagement ring on her finger. Her stomach twisted into impossible knots. Tonight was their first test, an exclusive company gala where Alex would parade his fiancée in front of executives who knew him better than his own family did. A single misstep could tear the entire illusion apart. Across from her, Alex reviewed notes on his phone with the calm of a man checking the weather forecast. To him, tonight was another calculated move on a chessboard. To Izzy, it felt like free-falling without a parachute. "Relax," he said without looking up. "You'll do fine." His voice was low, almost soothing. Izzy let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Easy for you to say. You actually belong here." He finally glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "You belong here because I said you do." A strange warmth bloomed in her chest at his certainty, even if it was manufactured. The car pulled up to a grand building, lights spilling out. Of massive glass doors, paparazzi flashes sparked like lightning across the entrance. Izzy's heart hammered. There was no turning back now. This wasn't practice, this was war. A valet opened her door, and Alex stepped out first, offering his hand. For a heartbeat, Izzy hesitated. Then she placed her hand in his, and the world exploded in flashes. Cameras snapped, voices called out, questions blurred into a cacophony. Izzy forced a smile and let Alex guide her up the steps. His hand was steady against the small of her back, a silent anchor in the storm of attention. Inside, the gala shimmered with wealth and ambition. Crystal chandeliers rained light over a sea of dark suits and glittering dresses. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable in the background. Alex leaned down, speaking into her ear with the intimacy of a lover. "Smile, laugh occasionally, and for the love of God, pretend you like me." Izzy bit back a laugh. That might be the hardest part. Their entrance drew immediate attention. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Alex Harrison wasn't the kind of man people expected to see accompanied by anyone, let alone someone like her. She felt their gazes slicing through her, curious, calculating, disbelieving. A woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper smile detached herself from a group and approached them, champagne glass in hand. "Alexander," she purred, "and this must be your fiancé." Her tone made it clear she doubted every syllable. Alex smiled tightly. "Izzy, meet Victoria Langston. Victoria, Izzy." Victoria extended a hand with the casual disdain of royalty greeting a peasant. Izzy shook it, her palm dry despite her racing nerves. "So lovely to meet you," Izzy said sweetly, matching Victoria's falseness note for note. "And you," Victoria replied with a poisonous smile. "You must tell me how you and Alex met. It must be quite the story." Izzy glanced at Alex, who gave the slightest nod. She turned back to Victoria and smiled. "Oh, it's incredibly romantic. He spilled coffee all over me at a cafe and spent an hour apologizing. By the end of it, I was half in love. She laughed, light and natural. Alex squeezed her waist gently, approval hidden in the touch. Victoria's smile faltered just for a second before she recovered. "Charming," she said. "Most of us never get that lucky." As Victoria drifted away, Izzy exhaled slowly. "Was that a test?" she murmured. Alex's mouth quirked. "If it was, you passed." They moved deeper into the room, mingling, shaking hands, smiling through thin layers of performance. Every time Izzy faltered, Alex was there, a steadying touch, a whispered joke, a private smile that seemed almost real. Halfway through the evening, they found themselves momentarily alone near the balcony doors. Izzy leaned against the cool glass, her cheeks flushed from forced laughter and too much adrenaline. "How do you live like this?" she asked quietly. Alex's gaze softened just a fraction. "You get used to it." She shook her head. "I don't think I want to." He said nothing, but for the first time, he looked almost guilty. A server passed with champagne flutes, and Alex plucked two, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed, and Izzy felt a jolt of electricity she couldn't explain away. She sipped the champagne to cover her confusion. It tasted expensive and empty. Across the room, Victoria watched them with narrowed eyes. Trouble was brewing. Izzy could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. "Time for the dance," Alex murmured, setting down his glass. Her heart skittered in panic. "Dance? Part of the illusion?" he said, offering his hand. "They expect it." Slowly, reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. He led her to the dance floor, sliding a hand to her waist as the quartet shifted to something softer, slower. She fit against him more easily than she wanted to admit. They moved together, surprisingly in sync, and for a moment, just a moment, the world fell away. The whispers, the doubts, the lies. It was just them, breathing in the same fragile rhythm. Izzy looked up and caught Alex watching her, something raw flickering in his guarded eyes. She looked away quickly, terrified by how easy it was to pretend, terrified by how much she didn't want to pretend anymore. The next morning, the illusion shattered with the harsh buzz of Alex's phone. Isabella stirred on the couch, groggy and disoriented. The memory of last night's gala flooded back in painful clarity. The dance, the way Alex's hand had lingered at her waist, the look in his eyes that wasn't part of any contract. She sat up, brushing hair from her face just as Alex stepped into the living room, fully dressed and fully armored again. "Good morning," she said hesitantly. He barely glanced at her. "We have a briefing with PR in an hour. Be ready." His voice was clipped, businesslike, as if the man from the dance floor had never existed. Izzy swallowed her disappointment. "Of course." She stood, wrapping herself back in the professional mask she had begun to master. Whatever had flickered between them last night, it was dead by morning light. The car ride to the PR office was silent. Alex tapped away on his phone, exuding cold efficiency. Izzy stared out the window, her reflection fragmented in the glass. She felt like a ghost sitting beside him, visible but untouchable. When they arrived, a cheerful woman named Sienna greeted them, ushering them into a sunlit conference room. The table was covered in glossy dossiers and thick binders labeled Media Strategy. "We need to refine your backstory," Sienna chirped, flipping through the documents. "There are too many gaps." Alex gestured for Izzy to speak. She cleared her throat. "We met at a coffee shop," she recited dutifully. "He spilled coffee on me. We went on a few dates, realized we were meant to be. Simple, sweet, believable." Sienna nodded approvingly. "Cute. People eat that up, but we'll need more details." Details. Izzy tried not to fidget. She hadn't thought beyond the basics. Favorite restaurants, favorite songs, inside jokes. Real couples had 1,000 invisible threads binding them together. She and Alex had a contract and a shared lie. Sienna peppered them with questions, smiling brightly as she typed notes. First vacation together. Favorite movie night tradition. Nicknames? Alex answered smoothly, inventing details with unsettling ease. She calls me Mr. Grumpy sometimes, Alex said with a straight face. Sienna laughed. Izzy blinked, stunned by how naturally he delivered the line. And he calls me Hurricane Izzy, she added without thinking, earning a smirk from Alex. The room buzzed with fake intimacy. It felt like building a house of cards in the middle of a storm. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. When they left the meeting, Izzy couldn't shake the feeling of being a marionette. Strings pulled. Tight. She fell into step beside Alex as they crossed the lobby. "You're good at this," she said, unable to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Practice," he replied shortly. "How many fake relationships have you had?" she asked, half joking. Alex didn't smile. None that were supposed to last. The weight of his words hung between them. Izzy looked away, guilt gnawing at her. This wasn't just a business arrangement, not anymore. Lines had blurred last night on that dance floor, whether he wanted to admit it or not. She shoved her hands into her coat pockets and walked faster, needing space to breathe, needing distance from the man who made her heart betray her common sense. Later that afternoon, while Alex was buried in meetings, Izzy wandered into the company library, a cavernous, quiet space filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves. She found a small corner by the window and curled up with a notebook, scribbling aimlessly. Thoughts tumbled out before she could stop them. Why does he look at me like that sometimes? Why does it hurt when he pretends it didn't happen? A voice interrupted her spiral. "You're not really one of us, are you?" Izzy looked up to see a young man in an expensive suit leaning against the shelf. His smile was charming but predatory. "Excuse me," she said coolly. "Don't get me wrong," he continued. "You're a breath of fresh air. But Alex Harrison, not exactly known for sentimental attachments, everyone's wondering, what makes you different?" Izzy forced a smile. Maybe he finally realized perfection is overrated. The man chuckled and sauntered away, leaving Izzy's heart pounding. The rumors had started. The cracks were forming. It was only a matter of time before someone dug too deep, before someone uncovered the truth neither she nor Alex could afford to expose. When Alex found her later, she was still in the library, staring blankly at her untouched notebook. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, closing the book with a snap. As they walked toward the elevator, she couldn't stop herself from asking, "Do you ever regret it? This arrangement?" Alex pressed the button, his face unreadable. "Regret isn't useful," he said finally. "I focus on outcomes." The elevator dinged. They stepped inside, alone. For a long, silent moment, neither spoke. Then, just as the doors began to close, Alex reached out and pressed the hold button. He turned to her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "But if you must know," he said, voice low, "I regret the things I can't admit to myself." Izzy's breath caught, and for the first time she wondered if maybe she wasn't the only one in danger of falling. The next few days blurred into a strange rhythm. Isabella found herself waking in a bed that wasn't hers, wearing a ring that wasn't real, and answering questions about a life she hadn't lived. Yet, somewhere between the rehearsed smiles and scheduled appearances, real moments began to creep in, unscripted, uncontrolled, dangerous, moments that weren't part of the contract but mattered more than anything else. It started small, a shared cup of coffee left on the kitchen counter before either spoke, a casual brush of hands reaching for the same file, a soft smile from Alex that wasn't calculated for an audience. Izzy told herself it was nothing. Professional, courtesy, politeness, coincidence, but deep down she knew better. She was living inside a beautiful lie, and it was starting to feel alarmingly real. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of photo ops, they collapsed onto opposite ends of the sprawling leather couch in Alex's penthouse. Izzy kicked off her heels with a groan, massaging her aching feet. "I swear your board members are vampires. They drain the life out of a room," she muttered. Alex chuckled, a low, genuine sound that warmed her more than the heated floors ever could. "You're not wrong," he said, loosening his tie and tossing it aside. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the city lights flickering outside, the massive windows. Izzy glanced at him, noting the exhaustion etched around his eyes. "You don't have to be perfect all the time, you know," she said quietly. Alex turned to her, startled. "Perfection is expected," he replied. "Not by me," she whispered. There was a vulnerability in him she hadn't seen before, a crack in the polished surface he presented to the world. It made her chest ache in ways she didn't understand. She looked away, embarrassed by the intimacy of the moment. "We should work on our shared memories," she said, forcing a lighter tone. "Can't have your grandmother thinking you married a stranger." Alex smiled faintly. "What do you suggest?" Izzy grinned mischievously. "An embarrassing story. Every real couple has one." She thought for a moment. "How about the time you tried to cook dinner and almost burned the kitchen down?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "I don't cook." "Exactly. Perfect story," she said, laughing. He shook his head but didn't argue, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Later that night, Izzy wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water and found Alex leaning against the counter, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up when she entered, his expression softer than usual. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shrugged. "Too quiet." Without thinking, he tapped a button on his phone, and soft jazz filled the apartment. Izzy blinked at him in surprise. "You listen to jazz?" she asked, smiling. "Only at night," he said. "It drowns out the noise in my head." She nodded, understanding, more than he knew. For a moment they stood there, the music weaving a fragile truce between them. Then impulsively, Izzy held out her hand. "Dance with me." Alex hesitated, a rare uncertainty flashing across his face. "No cameras, no audience, just us," she said gently. After a beat, he set down his phone and took her hand. His touch was hesitant at first, as if unsure how to be tender without being strategic. They swayed slowly to the music, barely moving, just breathing in each other's space. Izzy rested her head lightly against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her. Steady, strong, real. The world outside ceased to exist. There were no contracts here, no lies, only two people standing in a kitchen, finding solace in something neither had expected. As the song ended, Alex pulled back slightly, his hand lingering at her waist. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something raw and dangerous and undeniable. Izzy stepped back first, breaking the moment before it could destroy them both. "We should sleep," she said, voice too bright. Alex nodded, but his gaze lingered on her as she retreated down the hall. In her room, Izzy leaned against the door, heart racing. She knew it was foolish to let herself hope, foolish to want more than what they'd agreed upon. Yet she couldn't deny the truth, swelling inside her like a rising tide. She wasn't just pretending to love Alexander Harrison anymore. She was falling for him. And if she wasn't careful, it was going to break her in ways no contract ever could. The following Monday began with a rare burst of sunshine slicing through the skyscrapers. Isabella entered Harrison Dynamics with a spring in her step. Residual, warmth from the unscripted dance lingering in her veins. For once, the mask she wore didn't feel heavy. She was almost beginning to believe she could survive this illusion. Maybe, just maybe, it could become something more than a contract. Then she saw her, standing in the middle of the lobby, dressed in a crimson coat that screamed expensive vengeance, was Victoria Langston. Her sharp smile was aimed directly at Izzy, and in that single glance, Izzy's stomach plummeted. Victoria walked toward her with the grace of a panther, every step calculated. "Isabella Turner," she said, dripping condescension. "Or should. I say, Mrs. Harrison-to-be," Izzy forced a polite smile. "Victoria, what a surprise." Victoria's eyes glittered. "Not really. I'm quite invested in Alex's future." She let the word hang in the air like a guillotine. Izzy opened her mouth, but Victoria cut her off. "Coffee? You owe me at least that much." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Against her better judgment, Izzy followed Victoria into the adjoining cafe, heart pounding. They sat across from each other, porcelain cups between them, the tension thick enough to cut. "You know, Alex and I were engaged once," Victoria said casually, swirling her coffee. "Really?" Izzy said lightly, though every fiber of her screamed. "Almost made it down the aisle, but Alex, well, he has a complicated relationship with trust." Victoria's smile was sweet and cruel all at once. Izzy met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe he was waiting for the right person." "Maybe," Victoria said, tilting her head. "Or maybe he got better at choosing puppets who won't ask too many questions." The words hit like tiny daggers, precise and painful. Izzy sipped her coffee to hide the tremor in her hand. "I'm nobody's puppet," she said calmly. Victoria leaned in, lowering her voice. "Then let me give you a piece of advice, sweetheart. Harrison men don't fall in love. They fall into alliances, and alliances are disposable." She leaned back, triumphant. "When the contract ends, so will you." Izzy stared at her, refusing to let the fear show. "We'll see," she said quietly. Victoria's smile widened as if she already knew how the story would end. After Victoria left, Izzy sat frozen in the cafe for several minutes, fighting to breathe. The doubts she had buried came roaring back to life. Was this all just a game to Alex? A strategy he would abandon the moment it was convenient? She had promised herself she wouldn't fall for him. And yet here she was, already teetering on the edge of disaster. When she finally made it upstairs, Alex was waiting outside his office, phone to his ear. His eyes flickered over her, sharp and assessing. He ended the call abruptly. "Everything okay?" he asked. Izzy forced a smile. "Peachy." Alex's gaze darkened, sensing the lie but choosing not to press. "Not here. Not yet." "Meeting in 5, he said instead. "Don't be late." Throughout the morning, Izzy couldn't focus. Words blurred on her laptop. Meetings sounded like white noise. Her mind replayed Victoria's warning on a vicious loop. Harrison men don't fall in love. Alliances, disposable. Every time Alex glanced her way, she looked down, afraid he'd see the battle raging inside her. Afraid he wouldn't care even if he did. During lunch, Alex cornered her in the hallway. "You're distracted," he said quietly. She shrugged. "Long morning." His jaw tightened. "Is this about Victoria?" She froze, giving herself away. Alex cursed under his breath. "She's poison, Izzy. Don't listen to her." "You didn't deny it," she whispered before she could stop herself. Alex's face shuttered, closed. "I don't owe her explanations," he said coldly, "and neither do you." The dismissal in his tone sliced deeper than it should have. Izzy stepped back, needing air, needing distance. "Right, just an alliance," she muttered, walking away before he could see the sting in her eyes. Alex watched her go, fists clenching helplessly at his sides. She wasn't supposed to matter this much. That night, Izzy sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the indifferent city. She twisted the engagement ring around her finger, round and round, like a question she didn't know how to answer. She told herself it didn't matter. Told herself she was strong enough to walk away when the time came. But a tiny voice inside whispered that it already mattered too much. Across the hall, Alex stood in the doorway to his own room, hand resting against the frame. He'd heard the soft click of her door shutting, had felt the space between them grow wider. He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the wall, battling the instinct to cross that distance, to knock, to tell her that some mistakes were worth making, but he didn't, because he was Alexander Harrison. And Alexander Harrison didn't fall in love. He built walls, even when the only thing he truly needed was to tear them down. The next morning dawned with a muted chill that seemed to seep into everything. Isabella dressed carefully, choosing a soft cream sweater and black trousers, understated, professional, safe. She couldn't afford to show the war raging inside her today. As she adjusted the ring on her finger, she reminded herself this was a job, a role, nothing more. And yet when she caught her reflection in the mirror, the lie tasted bitter. Alex was waiting by the car, dark suit immaculate, mask firmly in place. He didn't say good morning, neither did she. The silence between them wasn't comfortable anymore. It was dense and brittle, ready to shatter with a single wrong move. As they slid into the back seat, Izzy kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching the city blur past, feeling a million miles away from the man sitting inches from her. The day was packed with appearances, meetings, interviews, photographs. They smiled when they needed to, laughed when appropriate, touched hands for the cameras. To the world, they were the perfect couple, devoted, effortless, enviable. But beneath the surface, cracks widened. Every glance, every touch that lingered half a second too long only deepened the chasm they danced around. Izzy could feel it, in her bones. They were heading for a cliff, and neither of them seemed willing to stop it. During an interview with a major business magazine, a journalist leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You two seem so natural together," she said, smiling. "Tell me, when did you know you were meant to be?" Izzy opened her mouth, ready to deliver the rehearsed story about spilled coffee and shy smiles. But Alex beat her to it. "The first time. She laughed at me," he said, voice low and steady. Izzy turned to him, startled. That wasn't part of the script. He met her eyes with a look she couldn't read, couldn't brace against. "She made fun of me during a meeting," he continued, smiling slightly. "And I realized no one else had ever dared." The interviewer cooed, eating it up. Izzy forced a laugh, but her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. What was he doing? When the interview ended, they retreated to a quiet corner backstage. Izzy rounded on him, voice low and furious. "That wasn't the story we agreed on." Alex shrugged, unfazed. "It sounded better. It sounded real," she snapped. He leaned in, voice dangerously soft. "Maybe that's because it was." She stared at him, stunned into silence. For one terrifying second she saw it, the truth he couldn't hide anymore. And it scared her more than anything Victoria Langston ever could. That night, back at the penthouse, the distance between them felt unbearable. Izzy stood at the window, arms crossed tightly, staring at the glittering city. Alex hovered by the kitchen, pretending to scroll through emails. Neither spoke. Words felt too dangerous now, too loaded. Finally, Izzy broke the silence. "This isn't sustainable," she said quietly. Alex didn't look up. "I know." She turned to face him, heart thudding. "So what do we do?" He set his phone down carefully, as if every movement had to be controlled. "We keep pretending." "Until when?" she demanded. "Until it breaks us." His eyes lifted to meet hers, and for the first time there was no armor between them, only fear, raw and human. "Until it's safe," he said. "Safe." She almost laughed. There was nothing safe about what they were doing, nothing safe about the way her heart twisted every time. He looked at her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. She crossed the room slowly, standing just out of reach. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Do you ever wish we weren't pretending?" Alex's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, In a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, "Every damn day." It was all she could do not to cry. She nodded once, sharply, and turned away before he could see the tears building in her eyes. She didn't want pity. She didn't want apologies. She wanted something he wasn't ready to give. That night, sleep was impossible. Izzy lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every stolen glance, every almost confession. Across the hall, Alex sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. They were prisoners of their own making, trapped by fear, pride, and something far more dangerous: hope. Neither knocked on the other's door. Neither crossed the invisible line drawn in desperation. But both knew the line wouldn't hold forever, and when it broke, nothing would ever be the same again. The gala was a blur of music, champagne, and whispered conversations. Isabella clutched her silver clutch tighter as she followed Alex, through the throng of high society sharks masquerading as benefactors. Tonight was another appearance for the sake of optics, another opportunity to sell their perfect lie. But something felt different in the air, something brittle and volatile. She could sense it in the way Alex's hand lingered at her waist longer than necessary. Their entrance was flawless, polished smiles, casual touches, whispered jokes that made them seem effortlessly in love. Cameras flashed, onlookers swooned. From the outside they were the picture of devotion, but inside Izzy could feel the tension winding tighter with every step, every glance. It was a dance on the edge of a blade, and they were running out of a choreography. They mingled as expected, exchanging pleasantries with board members and socialites. Izzy laughed when she was supposed to, nodded at all the right moments, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time Alex looked at her, it chipped away at the walls she'd so carefully built. Every accidental brush of his fingers against hers set her nerves on fire. She wasn't acting anymore, and judging by the flickers in Alex's eyes, neither was he. Halfway through the evening, as they stood near the grand staircase, a reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Turner, a few words." Alex hesitated, but Izzy squeezed his hand lightly and he nodded. The reporter smiled brightly. "How would you describe your relationship in one word?" she asked, thrusting the microphone forward. Izzy opened her mouth, brain scrambling for a safe, scripted answer. Alex spoke first. "Unexpected," he said. His voice was steady, but his grip on her hand tightened imperceptibly. The reporter laughed, clearly delighted. "Unexpected? Care to elaborate?" Alex looked down at Izzy, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face. "I wasn't looking for her," he said quietly, "but she found me anyway." The words hit harder than they should have, harder than anything rehearsed ever could. Izzy's throat tightened. She forced a smile for the cameras, but inside everything was crumbling. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to feel like this. The reporter moved on, satisfied. But Izzy barely registered the next half hour. It was all background noise. Her world had narrowed to the man beside her and the impossible truth hanging between them. Later, as they stood by the balcony, Alex leaned close, voice low. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured. Izzy laughed, the sound brittle, trying not to blow our cover. He studied her for a moment, then said something that made her breath catch. "Sometimes I forget we're pretending." She turned to him sharply, heart in her throat. "Don't say things you don't mean," she whispered. "Izzy." But before he could finish, Victoria appeared, resplendent in navy blue, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Alexander," she purred, "you always did have a weakness for strays." Izzy stiffened, Alex's jaw tightened. "Walk away, Victoria," he said coldly. She laughed, the sound brittle and bright. "Or what? You'll pretend harder?" The words landed like a slap. Before Izzy could think, before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "He doesn't have to pretend with me," she said, voice steady. "Maybe that's why you're still bitter." Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Victoria's face hardened, and for a second, Izzy thought she might actually strike her. But then Victoria smiled sweetly. "We'll see how long your fairy tale lasts," she said, and sauntered away. The air between Izzy and Alex crackled. Without thinking, Alex grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the crowd, down a side hallway, away from prying eyes. They stopped near a service entrance, the world falling away. "You didn't have to do that," Alex said, voice rough. "I know," Izzy whispered, "but I wanted to." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then, without warning, Alex cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Not for the cameras, not for the contract, but because he couldn't not. Because pretending had never been more impossible than it was in that moment. The kiss shattered whatever fragile balance they had maintained. When Alex finally pulled back, both of them were breathing hard, stunned by what they had just done. Isabella stared at him, heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't a calculated move. It was raw, reckless, real, and it terrified her more than anything else. Alex's hands dropped from her face slowly, as if it physically hurt him to let go. "Izzy," he began, voice rough and broken, but she stepped back, needing space, needing air. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't make this worse." He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time since she met him, Alexander. Harrison looked completely, utterly lost. The hallway seemed to close in around them. The gala music thudded distantly, a cruel reminder that the world was still spinning, even as theirs cracked apart. "This isn't what we agreed on," Izzy said, fighting to steady her breathing. Alex's jaw clenched. "Maybe what we agreed on was a mistake. Or maybe thinking this could ever be real was," she shot back, pain lacing every word. Alex reached for her, but she flinched away. His hand froze mid-air, a broken gesture. "Izzy, don't," she said again, voice trembling. "Don't say anything you can't take back." For a moment she thought he would fight for it. For them. But then his shoulders slumped and she knew. He was retreating behind the only armor he trusted, indifference. Without another word, Izzy turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She didn't stop until she reached the restroom, where she locked herself in a stall and pressed trembling hands to her mouth. Tears threatened, but she forced them down. She couldn't fall apart here, not where Victoria or anyone else could see her bleed. Meanwhile, Alex stood frozen where she had left him, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Part of him wanted to chase after her, to grab her, to tell her that the kiss had been the most honest thing he'd done in years. But the other part, the colder, crueler part, knew better. Feelings were liabilities, attachments were weaknesses. He had learned that lesson too well to forget it now. When Izzy finally returned to the gala, her smile was fixed and brittle. She slipped seamlessly back into character, laughing at jokes she didn't hear, posing for photos she would never want to see. Across the room, Alex did the same. From a distance, they looked perfect. Up close, anyone paying attention could see the fracture lines spider-webbing beneath the surface. After the event, they rode home in strained silence. The space between them in the car felt vast, unbridgeable. Izzy stared out the window, clutching her clutch like a lifeline. Alex sat rigidly beside her, hands resting on his knees, not daring to reach out again. The city lights flickered past, cold and uncaring. Neither spoke, neither dared. When they reached the penthouse, Izzy moved quickly, practically running for her room. Alex didn't stop her. He stood in the living room, staring after her, fists curling helplessly at his sides. Upstairs, Izzy leaned against her bedroom door, heart breaking. She had crossed a line tonight, a line she couldn't uncross. And now she didn't know how to find her way back. Sleep was impossible. She lay awake, replaying the kiss over and over, torturing herself with what it meant, what it didn't. Across the hall, Alex sat on the floor against his bed, head tilted back, eyes burning with regret he didn't know how to name. He had hurt her. Worse, he had given her hope, and then ripped it away with his silence. The next morning was colder than the city had seen in months. Frost clung to the windows like a warning. Izzy moved around the apartment with mechanical efficiency, packing a small suitcase. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not with this gaping wound between them. She would honor the contract. She wasn't a quitter. But she needed space, distance, survival. When Alex found her by the door, bag in hand, something inside him shattered. "Leaving?" he asked, voice hollow. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere real," she said quietly. The words hurt him more than she intended, but she didn't apologize. She couldn't afford to soften now, not when she was barely holding herself together. Without another word, she walked past him, out the door, down the hallway. She didn't look back. She knew if she did, she might never find the strength to leave again. And for the first time, in a very long time, Alexander Harrison watched someone walk away and realized he had no idea how to fix it. The days blurred into each other like pages of a book Izzy didn't want to finish. She found a small, worn-down apartment in a quieter part of the city, far from the gleaming towers of Harrison Dynamics. The place smelled faintly of old paint and forgotten dreams, but it was hers. No scripts, no contracts, no illusions. Just her and the deafening silence of choices made and hearts broken. She threw herself into anything that kept her hands busy. Freelance gigs, evening classes, volunteer work. Anything to drown out the echo of Alex's voice in her head, the memory of his hands on her waist, the way he had looked at her when he thought no one was watching. At night, though, the distractions melted away and the loneliness crept in, slow and cruel. Across the city, Alex buried himself in work. Meetings bled into strategy sessions, deals closed with ruthless efficiency. His team praised his renewed focus, his sharp instincts. No one dared mention the hollow look in his eyes. No one dared ask why the CEO, who had once moved through the world with detached brilliance, now carried an invisible weight on his shoulders. In the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, Alex found himself staring at the engagement ring, still sitting in its velvet box on his nightstand. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. He couldn't bring himself to move it either. It sat there like a scar, a reminder of the one thing he couldn't fix with a well-written contract or a calculated decision. Meanwhile, gossip swirled around Harrison Dynamics. Where was the fiancé? Had the fairy tale crumbled already? Rumors grew like weeds in the fertile soil of absence. Alex ignored them outwardly, but every whisper, every sidelong glance, felt like a needle under his skin. Izzy was gone, and it wasn't just bad for business. It was bad for him, far worse than he could admit. One evening, weeks later, Alex found himself outside a small bookstore, tucked between two towering office buildings. It wasn't intentional. His feet had simply carried him there, like muscle memory. Izzy loved bookstores. She had once dragged him into one, laughing at his discomfort among the cluttered aisles and dusty shelves. Now he stood outside, staring at the display window, aching for something he couldn't name. Inside her tiny apartment, Izzy curled up on the threadbare couch, staring at her laptop screen. A job application blinked back at her, promising nothing. She should be moving on. She should be building a life beyond Harrison Dynamics, beyond Alex. But every time she thought about the future, it felt hollow without the impossible dream she had dared to touch. Her phone buzzed once on the coffee table. She glanced at it. Without hope, unknown number, heart pounding, she opened the message. 2 words, "Are you okay?" No name, no punctuation. But she knew. She could almost hear his voice. She set the phone down without replying. Some wounds needed more than an apology to heal. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. That night, sleep eluded them both. Izzy stared at the cracked ceiling above her bed, listening to the city breathe around her. Across town, Alex sat by the penthouse windows, staring out at the stars swallowed by city lights. The same moon watched over them, cold and distant, indifferent to the ache of unfinished stories and unspoken goodbyes. In the following days, Izzy began to carve out a fragile routine: coffee at the corner shop, sketching ideas for a children's book she might never finish, smiling at strangers just to prove she still could. Healing wasn't linear. Some days she felt almost whole. Other days, the sight of a man in a charcoal suit sent her spiraling back into grief she didn't have the right to claim. Alex threw himself into planning a new corporate initiative, a charitable foundation, something to show the world he was more than ruthless ambition. But every draft, every mission statement felt hollow. Izzy had once told him he was capable of more, that he was better than the version of himself he clung to out of fear. Without her, he wasn't sure what he was anymore. Weeks turned into a month. The city shifted around them, indifferent and unrelenting, but neither Izzy nor Alex could outrun the echo of what they had lost. Not truly. The truth haunted them in different ways. In the silence between conversations, in the absence of a laugh that used to fill empty rooms, in the realization that pretending had never been the real danger. Loving had been, and neither of them had been ready for it. Now they were left with the pieces, scattered across a city too big for regrets, and a future that refused to be rewritten without each other. It started with a letter, not an email, not a text. A real letter, pressed into the mailbox of Izzy's tiny apartment one rainy morning. The envelope was thick and expensive, her name written in a hand she recognized immediately. Heart-pounding, she turned it over. No return address, no company logo, just her name, and the tremble she couldn't hide when her fingers brushed the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded. Come to 46 Westbrook Street, Saturday, noon. Alex. No explanations, no apologies. Just an address and the silent weight of everything unsaid between them. Izzy stared at the note for a long time, battling herself. Every rational bone in her body told her to ignore it. Move on, let sleeping lies lie. But her heart had never been rational. Saturday came faster than she wanted. The city wore a thin mist, shrouding everything in uncertainty. Izzy stood outside 46 Westbrook Street, nervously clutching the letter in her pocket. It was an old, abandoned schoolhouse, its facade worn but somehow still standing proud against the grey sky. She hesitated at the door, then pushed it open, the creak echoing into the emptiness. Inside, the space had been transformed. Strings of soft lights hung across the rafters. Easels were lined up along the walls, each holding a sketch. Her sketches, the ones she had doodled during sleepless nights. Scenes of laughter, of love, of impossible dreams. Izzy moved from drawing to drawing, her throat tightening. She hadn't even realized he had noticed them, had saved them. At the far end of the room, Alex stood, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked different, less polished, more real. For a long moment they just stared at each other across the empty space, neither daring to move. Then Alex spoke, voice low and hoarse. I never said it because I was afraid. Izzy's heart squeezed painfully. Afraid of what? Of you, he said with a broken smile. Of what you made me want. Of who you made me want to be. He took a step closer, as if approaching a wild thing that might bolt. I thought I was protecting us by keeping my distance, but I was just protecting myself. Izzy's fingers curled around the letter in her pocket. And now? Now, Alex said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I'm willing to risk it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the velvet box. The engagement ring still sparkled inside, unchanged by everything they had been through. No contracts, no lies, just me asking you to come back. Not for the company, not for appearances, for me. Tears blurred Izzy's vision, but she held them back. She crossed the room slowly, the distance shrinking with each step. When she stood in front of him, she didn't take the ring. Instead, she reached up and placed a hand over his heart. "This was never about contracts," she said softly. "It was about this." Alex closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. "I can't promise I won't mess up," he whispered. "I can't promise I won't get scared again." Izzy smiled through her tears. "I'm not asking for perfection, Alex. I'm asking for honesty." He opened his eyes, and for the first time she saw him without the armor, without the walls, just a man standing before her, terrified and hopeful and very much in love. Slowly, she took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger again. It fit as perfectly as it had the first time, but now it meant something real. Alex let out a shaky breath and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. She clung to him just as tightly, feeling the pieces of her heart click back into place. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet of second chances. The world outside could wait. The doubts, the fears, they could wait too. Now, there was only this. Two broken people choosing each other against all odds, against all logic. A choice that wasn't safe, wasn't easy, but was real. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. As the lights flickered softly around them, Izzy realized something she should have known all along. The right love doesn't demand perfection. It simply asks you to stay. The week after their reunion felt surreal. Izzy and Alex moved carefully, like survivors of a storm afraid the sky might crack open again. They talked late into the night, filling the spaces between them with stories, fears, dreams. Each conversation peeled away another layer of armor, revealing something raw and breathtaking underneath. But one thing still lingered, unspoken. The world still thought their engagement was a lie. Izzy didn't push. She knew better than to demand public declarations from a man who had spent his entire life hiding. But a part of her, small and stubborn, still ached for it. For him to choose her not just behind closed doors, but out where everyone could see, where it mattered, where it was real beyond question. She told herself patience was love too. Still, she waited. Meanwhile, Alex was making plans, secret plans, dangerous plans. He didn't tell Izzy because he knew she would protest, knew she would say it wasn't necessary. But he also knew that some things deserved to be seen, deserved to be shouted instead of whispered. It wasn't enough for him to change in the dark. He wanted to change in the daylight too. He owed her that much. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Harrison Dynamics' annual shareholders meeting was approaching, a massive event broadcast. Live to investors around the globe. Normally, Alex used the stage to outline growth strategies, unveil new ventures. This year, he would use it for something else entirely, something no one, least of all Izzy, would expect. The morning of the event, Alex stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with shaking hands, not from fear of the crowd. He was used to being watched, judged. No, this fear was personal. It was about her, about not screwing up the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Taking a breath, he turned away from the mirror and walked out to meet his future. Izzy arrived separately, as planned, blending into the crowd of executives and journalists. She found a seat near the front, heart pounding as she watched Alex take the stage. He looked every inch the CEO, calm, commanding, lethal in a suit. She smiled to herself, pride and longing twining painfully together. She had no idea what he was about to do. Alex began with the usual, financial updates, strategic projections. The room buzzed with polite interest. Then halfway through a slide on international expansion, he did something unheard of. He closed his laptop, stepped away from the podium, and spoke from the heart. "There's something more important than numbers," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. The room stilled, every eye locked onto him, cameras whirred, reporters leaned forward. "For years," Alex continued, "I thought success meant control, power, isolation. I thought vulnerability was weakness, that love was a liability." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Izzy. His voice softened. "I was wrong." A murmur rippled through the audience. Alex smiled faintly. "There's someone here today who taught me that love isn't a weakness. It's the only thing worth fighting for. She taught me that real success isn't about building walls. It's about building a life with someone who sees you, flaws and all, and chooses to stay." Izzy's breath caught painfully in her chest. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to cry. She wanted to laugh. Instead, she sat frozen, tears brimming in her eyes as Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring box again. "Isabella Turner," he said, voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want contracts. I don't want appearances. I want you." Gasps and camera flashes exploded around the room. Alex stepped down from the stage and crossed the floor toward her, ignoring the stunned executives and whispering reporters. He knelt before her, opening the box, offering the ring like it was the only thing keeping him standing. "Marry me," he said simply. "For real. No lies, no safety nets, just us." The world faded away. Izzy saw only him, his fear, his hope, his love shining so fiercely it stole her breath. She didn't hesitate. She slid off her chair, dropping to her knees in front of him, laughing through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alex. 1,000 times yes." The room erupted in applause, a roar of sound that barely registered. Alex slipped the ring onto her finger again, this time with no contracts, no conditions. Just a promise, just a beginning. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time kissed her not as a lie, not as a performance, but as a man kissing the only woman who had ever truly mattered. Somewhere, flashbulbs exploded. Somewhere, news alerts buzzed into existence, but in that moment none of it mattered. There was only Alex and Izzy, and a future they would build together. This time for real. The applause still rang in Izzy's ears as they slipped away from the chaos. Alex led her through a side door, away from the cameras, the reporters, the flashing lights. Only when they were alone in a quiet hallway did he stop and turn to face her. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. It wasn't enough to say yes in front of everyone. Now came the harder part, building something real. Izzy smiled up at him, heart swelling with more emotion than she could handle. "You're really bad at subtlety," she teased softly. Alex laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Subtlety wasn't getting me anywhere with you," he said. "I had to make it impossible for you to say no." She reached up and brushed a hand across his jaw. "You never had to make it impossible, Alex. You just had to make it real." They found a small garden behind the conference center, half forgotten, shielded from the world by thick hedges and dim fairy lights. They sat on a weathered bench, the cool night air wrapping around them. Izzy took a deep breath. "If we're going to do this," she said carefully, "we have to do it right. No contracts, no scripts, no pretending it's easy when it's not." Alex nodded immediately, but she held up a hand. "No rushing either," she added. "No grand expectations. No trying to control everything just because it scares you." He winced slightly, but the understanding in his eyes was clear. "And no disappearing," she said, voice trembling. "When it gets hard, when I get scared, when you get scared." She met his gaze fiercely. "We stay." He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "We stay," he repeated, "even when it's messy, especially when it's messy." Izzy exhaled shakily, feeling some of the fear loosen its grip. "I'm not asking for perfection," she whispered. "I just want you to be honest, even when it's ugly." "Especially then," Alex promised, his voice rough. "You deserve all of me, not just the parts that are easy to love." They sat in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of their words settle between them. The night buzzed softly around. Them, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant traffic, the slow, steady beating of two stubborn hearts finding their way home. Finally, Izzy tilted her head back and laughed, the sound light and real. "You know," she said, smiling, "I think this might actually work." Alex grinned at her, boyish and hopeful. "I think," he said, "it already is." They stood and wandered through the garden, hands brushing occasionally, conversations flowing easily now that the walls had crumbled. Izzy told him about her dreams, the real ones, the messy, impractical, wonderful ones she had never dared say aloud before. Alex listened, like every word mattered, like every hope she had was a blueprint he wanted to help build. He told her about his own fears, losing himself, losing her, losing the fragile happiness he was only beginning to believe he deserved. He spoke of regrets and second chances, of wanting more than empires and boardrooms, of wanting a life filled with laughter and late-night talks and kitchen dance parties, of wanting her, only her. By the time they made their way back to the main building, the night had deepened into velvet darkness. The last of the crowd had dispersed, and the city lay sprawling and quiet beyond the glass doors. Alex squeezed her hand. "Come home with me," he said, voice low. "Not because you have to, not because of any deal, just because." Izzy smiled, tears prickling her eyes again. Happy ones this time. "Okay," she whispered. They left together, unnoticed and unhurried. Two people no longer trapped by lies or fear. Just two hearts beating in uncertain, stubborn rhythm, willing to try, willing to stay, willing to love imperfectly, but fiercely. At the penthouse, Izzy hesitated in the doorway, overwhelmed by how much had changed. The place felt different now, less a fortress, more a home waiting to be filled. Alex dropped his keys on the table and turned to her. "I don't want to be the man who's too afraid to fight for something real," he said. "Not anymore." "You're already not," she said simply, stepping into his arms. They stood there swaying gently, no music but the quiet thrum of their shared heartbeat. No more pretending, no more fear. Just this moment, this chance, this messy, beautiful beginning. Outside, the city pulsed with endless possibilities. Inside, Izzy and Alex held onto the only one that mattered. They weren't perfect, they weren't safe, but they were real, and finally, that was more than enough. 1 year later, the city wore its usual armor of glass and noise, but for Izzy, everything looked different. Life had settled into something wonderfully unpredictable. The fairy tale hadn't come with crowns and castles. It had come with arguments over takeout orders, sleepy mornings tangled in sheets, and quiet laughter filling spaces that had once echoed with loneliness. It was real. It was theirs. Alex stood across the living room, wrestling with a crooked picture frame. Izzy watched him, biting her lip to suppress a laugh. "It's not straight," he muttered, tilting the frame slightly to the left. "It's fine," Izzy said, crossing the room. "It's perfect." He gave her a look of mock outrage. "You have no standards." "Maybe that's why I kept you," she teased, wrapping her arms around his waist. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're stuck with me now," he murmured. She smiled against his chest. Good. Their life wasn't glamorous by outsider standards. The penthouse was still impressive, but their favorite room was the messy, sun-drenched kitchen. Their favorite nights were the ones spent curled up on the couch, arguing about movies or dreaming about impossible vacations they might actually take one day. After months of planning, they had launched a foundation together, a non-profit dedicated to funding art programs for underprivileged youth. Izzy's dream, fueled by Alex's resources and their shared stubbornness. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Izzy had spoken first, her voice shaking with nerves and joy. Alex had stood beside her, pride shining openly for anyone to see. That was the difference now. They didn't hide anymore. They didn't pretend. Alex's colleagues had learned quickly that Isabella Turner was not a phase, not a PR stunt. She was the woman who made their terrifying CEO human. The woman who laughed too loudly in boardrooms and called him out when he retreated into old habits. The woman he would move mountains for, quietly and without fanfare. One evening, as they unpacked a box of books in their new home, a modest townhouse with creaky floors and a tiny garden, Izzy found an old folder tucked between volumes of business law. Curious, she flipped it open and gasped. Inside were copies of her first freelance sketches. The messy, hopeful ones she thought no one had ever noticed. "You kept these," she said, voice thick. Alex looked up from where he was stacking dishes. "Of course I did," he said simply. "They're the first things that made me believe I could have something more than boardrooms and mergers." She set the folder down carefully and crossed the room to him. "You're a sap," she whispered, kissing him. "Only for you," he replied, kissing her back with a grin. Later that night, they sat on the back porch, wrapped in an old blanket, watching the stars battle the city lights. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Izzy asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Alex chuckled. "Every day." "One wrong turn," she mused. "One wrong building, and everything changed." "It wasn't the building," he said, brushing a kiss over her hair. "It was you." Izzy smiled, heart full. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think right place, right time was a myth. That life just happened and you got what you got." Alex shifted to look at her, his hand sliding gently against her cheek. "And now?" She tilted her head into his touch. "Now I know the right place is wherever you are," she whispered. "And the right time is whenever I'm with you." He kissed her then, slow and deep and sure. No cameras, no contracts, no pretense. Just a man and a woman who had chosen each other again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. They had built a life from broken pieces, stitched together with stubborn hope and fierce love. The wind rustled the garden, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. Izzy closed her eyes and breathed it in, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. They weren't perfect, they weren't fearless, but they were exactly where they were meant to be. Right place, right time, right heart. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.